Hello, and welcome to the Thematic Intelligence Podcast, a global data thematic intelligence we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Martina Raveni, and today I'm joined by Jerry Caron, Head of Research and Analysis, and Gary Barton, Research Director, both from the tech team here in Global Data, to discuss about network APIs, what they are, what are the potential opportunities they bring, who are the key players, and what challenges they are facing. Hi, Gary. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Well, thank
Hi,
you.
Martina. How are you?
Thanks for being here. So at the end of May, you will speak at the virtual conference on network APIs and service ecosystems. You're going to explore the increased interest in APIs, service ecosystem, and its potential implications for consumer services, enterprise services, and technology companies. So the network APIs touch multiple themes, including cybersecurity, IoT, cloud, 5G, and AI, to name a few. So let's start. API, Application Programming Interface. So my first very question is, what are network APIs and why is the tech industry excited about them? And if you also could tell us some known use cases, maybe.
Sure. Well, I'll start us off. So the API, the Application Programming Interface, as you said, Martina, it's at a basic level. It's an old technology, and they were designed as a way of sharing data between platforms and systems. So what they do is they enable communication between systems and platforms. So one platform makes a request for data or information from another platform. So there are lots of examples about this, but for networks in particular, it's become a way in two areas. One is how you buy services, and another is how you take data from the network itself, how that network's performing. So for a monitoring purpose for enterprises, they're starting to look at how they can take that data and understand how the network is performing, and therefore how their wider IT systems are performing. A lot of application services are based in the cloud now, SaaS. We have public cloud, so they need to understand how their network's performing so they can understand how their systems are performing. But it's also a way of how you buy these services as well. So for the developer community, they're looking at APIs as a way that they can take the connectivity that networks provide, and this is both on the mobile side, 5G, and then the fixed side, broadband. It can be a wide area network services, things like SD-WAN and SASE, and how they can take those services and consume them and open up new ways of utilizing those services. So it's basically a way of how the developer community can start to embed communication connectivity into a wider range of the services that they're developing, which is why it matters both for the service providers, those who operate the networks, then also for the wider tech community.
Yeah, and so if I just add on there, look, there's this a huge amount of excitement about this. You might say disproportionately so. And the reason why is because, as Gary alluded to, this if it comes to fruition the way they envision, will provide access to network capabilities and drive whole new types of capabilities and applications, both for consumers like you and I, but also a huge range of business services. Now, why is that exciting? Why is that important? Well, it's almost existential for telecom service providers, what's going on here. For a number of years, 20, maybe 30 years, they've been locked in to a trap, if you will, where they have to keep investing in their networks more and more and more to meet the capacity demands of consumers and businesses alike. But they cannot raise the average revenue. So they're spending but not making any money off of that. And meanwhile, which is even more frustrating for these companies, is that as they've been doing this, they've been watching companies that offer application services riding totally for free over the networks that they've invested in. They've seen their market caps go up into the trillions, whereas their market caps stay flat. So network APIs are seen by the telecoms industry and the related ecosystem as a way out of that trap to completely change the economics of offering services. So it is indeed extremely generating a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of effort being put toward it.
Thanks, Paul. So, Jerry, you talk about the excitement, the hype, but also the spending. So, I wanted to ask you now, what's the current state of the market? So, is APIs a real opportunity?
Yes. So about a year and a few months ago, there were a couple of key announcements made, and they were about standards bodies and about cooperative efforts amongst telecom service providers, but also technology companies and some other types of businesses. So there are a couple of organizations working on this. One's called the Open Gateway Initiative. And again, that has a large number of telecoms operators and technology companies working on solutions that enable these network APIs that work across multiple telecom operators in the same region. And in addition to that, there's more technical standards being developed, and that's got an acronym, but it's pronounced CAMERA. And that is driven by an industry standard group called the GSMA, as well as others working together to develop the core technologies in sort of an open source fashion. So these are in place and are driving forward. And indeed, we do already see live examples of this actually working in a couple of interesting applications. And Gary, maybe you can speak to a couple that we've seen initially.
Yeah, of course. I think what the use case for APIs has been one of the biggest challenge for the industry. And this year, 2024, Verizon, we've seen at their recent analyst event, they stated that they felt that this would be the year of APIs would take off. And I think there's some justification for that, because the early use cases we've seen have been around fraud prevention. And it's interesting because they weren't necessarily the use cases that the industry first sort of thought that would generate interest and traction. They looked at things like bandwidth on demand, connectivity on demand services, for example, things like network slicing of 5G technologies. But those technologies haven't really yet come available. So for network slicing for 5G, it's not widely available. The rollout of standalone 5G, true 5G, has been quite slow, and there are other challenges for that technology. But where we've seen a need, we know that cybersecurity, cybercrime is a fraud, is a huge drain on every economy. It's one of the biggest challenges facing global economies. It's one of the biggest costs affecting economies. So to be able to combat that in a small way with network technology is very important. So what we've seen is the use cases that have really taken off is taking the SIM, so the actual identifier in the phone that connects, that allows the mobile device to access the mobile network, embedding user authentication into that SIM, the IMEI number in the SIM, and then combining that with a technology that sees if a SIM has been swapped recently, so it stops spoofing, so that people can't clone phones. So you embed the identity of a person or a device in that SIM, and then through the network also tell whether that SIM has been swapped recently. And it becomes a very fast way of authenticating a user. So when might we use that? Well, at the moment, we're beset with SMSs and messages from companies. Every time you try and perform a transaction or reset your password, you get sent a one-time password code. What this technology promises to do is to take out that step, to automatically verify through the device that person making the transaction is who they claim to be. It is the device that has the right to be able to make that change or access that data. And this brings an opportunity to the service providers, because they're embedding more inherent value in the network. And that's something that they're trying to do, is they're losing out, as you alluded to in your statement, about the value chain, about where their investment in their network, are they gaining value from it? This is potentially a way for them to take some of that value chain out there, embed it in the network, and allow them to monetize it. And that's starting to happen.
Yeah, and you can imagine that just about any bank or any company doing financial transactions, for example, would be interested in this, and probably would attach a lot of value to it, because it makes the process more secure, but also more streamlined for its customers. So service providers are hoping to monetize that. And by the way, the example that Gary just gave with the anti-fraud is live now. It is working in Latin American countries and elsewhere. But taking it to the consumer level, Gary alluded to this quality on demand. So another key potential area, which hasn't emerged yet, it's still an idea. We haven't really seen any live use cases, but the idea that, for example, gaming software, for example, would allow their customers to click a button and to get a different level of quality while they're in the midst of a game or whatever, and then throttle back when they're done, and then there'd be different fees associated with that. So again, potentially big opportunity for the service providers that they haven't been able to activate previously.
Yeah, thanks, both. They're really informative to know that there are use cases that we've been seeing now and potential opportunities. And when I'm thinking about the landscape, I'm thinking about the API ecosystem. It seems to me really complex. So I wanted to ask you, Gary, who are the key players?
Well, Marina, Martina, you're absolutely right that it is a complex landscape, and there are a number of players trying to get involved in this because people see the revenue potential. There's a lot of people stating claims. So personally, I think that the open standards bodies, so the GSMA, Camara, Open Gateway Initiative, those sorts of campaigns on the mobile side, on the fixed networking side, groups like the Metro Ethernet Forum, the MEF, I think these groups have a huge role to play. One of the reasons that the anti-fraud use case has taken off, is working, is because a large number of providers have adopted those standards. So we've seen it in markets across the world, in Brazil, across Europe, in the US. Those standards are being rolled out by most mobile network providers. So for an API to be relevant to the developer community, to a bank, for them to invest in that technology, it has to appeal to a certain percentage of the population. So if you could take say the three largest providers in any given market, and then say, right, you've got 75% plus of mobile users, that API is relevant to them, that technology is relevant to 75% of mobile users, then that suddenly becomes very worthwhile to developers. So I think creating that cooperation between the providers is critical. But there are a lot of other vendors and tech companies looking at these technologies. So if you look at vendors such as Nokia and Ericsson, both leading players in the mobile radio network market, they both have their doubts about whether the GSMA initiatives can do it on their own, and they're both trying to create their own ecosystem of APIs. Again, trying to work with providers in multiple markets to create that critical mass to support those APIs. And Ericsson in particular has experience on the API side, working with Vonage, which is CPaaS, communication platform as a service, which is another technology area that seeks to embed communication into application and into services. And then, of course, we've got giants like the hyperscalers, so Microsoft, Google, AWS. They're critical cloud services. There are a lot of API interest about how you engage between networks and those cloud services, so they'll play a role. Microsoft has already done a lot of work around APIs for its own CPaaS platform, so they will play a role, and there'll be this battle between whether it's the cloud or the network that sort of takes control of enterprises' IT systems. And then you have the IT service providers. Now, they have the coding ability. So with APIs, to create an API, there's a lot of engineering work that has to go into that. If for enterprises, if you're trying to create complex APIs for their IT estate, then the engineering skills of the IT service providers will certainly play a role in helping companies to create APIs that will open up the B2B2C cases. So how do you create the example that Jerry was talking about, a consumer buying a service? That we want that to be easy for the consumer, but it takes a lot of complex engineering to make that easy for the consumer. So those IT service providers may be there. And then, of course, there's the service providers themselves, because they have to embed this API technology within their own networks. If they don't embrace APIs, then the networks aren't open and the whole thing falls down. So there are a number of key players there.
I mean, if you have the service providers and the networks on one side, and you have the application developers on the other side, or the enterprises, for that matter. The real battleground, I think, that will emerge is really in the middle. So who is going to make it easy for those application developers to actually create the applications and then provide that connectivity or that link to what the service providers offer with their network partners. That's going to be the real battleground going forward.
Thanks very much both for clarifying to this and to us all this ecosystem. And let's move to the last question. I can see that there are, and you explained very well, many valuable opportunities for APIs, but at the same time, we cannot ignore the risks and the challenges, and there are many. So, Jerry, what are the challenges, and in a way, what could go wrong?
Well, the first one is the pure complexity of what we're talking about here. It's viewed as a hugely important initiative. So I have no doubt that there's going to be plenty of energy expended to make sure that this can work technically. But then, okay, if it works technically, and actually in many ways that's already proven, it's extracting the value from that. Building the developer community, making it easy for them, providing the crucial links between those applications and the actual activation of the money. So how does billing work? Is it by second per minute, or is it just done in a block form at the top? All of that is a potential, creates complexity, which hasn't really been ironed out yet. And then there are other issues as well. Gary, perhaps you can articulate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think regulatory issues are one that really need to be considered for a lot of the more advanced use cases. So the bandwidth on demand, a gamer buying that boosted connectivity. There's laws called net neutrality, and bandwidth on demand may be against net neutrality laws. I think there's some doubt from the US providers whether they will actually be able to use quality on demand, bandwidth on demand APIs in the current framework of net neutrality. There's also security issues. If you're opening up more of that network infrastructure, then you create more potential vectors for attack for bad actors. So APIs need to go hand in hand with security to make sure that they don't become a way for bad actors to misuse connectivity to gain access or control of any of our key communications infrastructure. And for the service providers, the APIs may open up new ways of embedding connectivity and buying services, but it's not necessarily the panacea that they hope it is. It automatically doesn't necessarily insert them back in the value chain. It may just be a way to bypass the network operators for more advanced solution providers or different types of solution providers, the application providers you mentioned, to come in and just take that connectivity and leave the service providers as that much used phrase, the dumb pipe. So I think the excitement's there, but they need to prove that there is a business model that works for the service providers.
Yeah, precisely. Lots of excitement, lots of energy, lots of effort, but it's still very early days and there's a long way to go.
Thank you very much both for those instant insights. You can join our expert panel at our virtual conference on the 29th and 30th of May, and you can find the link in the description. Thanks all for listening, and from us in Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.